Before the film began for Blue Ivy, I decided to look at the movie Annabelle, as it's very similar to the film we created. Annabelle is a horror film which utilizes sound effects to capture the audience's attention, as scary sound effects are always in horror films, as it is a way of keeping the audience interested in the film. Annabelle followed the generic horror conventions as most horror films are, based on villain versus victim, which this creates excitement and suspense for the audience. In the film Blue Ivy, we decided to use Todoro's theory, as it is easier to construct a film which is easy to follow by the audience, as the story follows different steps of the theory. In the film, the equilibrium is Mike and Kobe are walking home. The disruption is when Mike and Kobe stumble upon the doll in the cemetery. The resolution is when Mike places the doll in the cemetery where they first saw it. This is important as it creates an easy to follow storyline for the audience when watching the film. Using binary oppositions allows the film to use a villain and a victim, which this is a horror genre convention. In the film, the villain is the haunted doll and the victims are Mike and Kobe, as they are haunted by the mystic doll. Using this narrative structure, it allowed us to create a suspense for the audience. Binary opposition suits the genre of horror, as we can see the struggles of the victims when facing the villain. This allows the film to be more interesting for the audience, as the storyline is more suited for the horror genre fans. This is very similar to the movie Annabelle, as they follow the structure of having a villain and a victim. We decide to use closed narrative with certain elements of open narrative, as Mike manages to place the doll back in the cemetery, which concludes the film. However, we use certain elements of open narrative because at the end, the doll turns its head and looks at Mike. This conveys that the doll is still going to haunt Mike. This is a narrative technique that a lot of horror films use to keep the audience excited, as the doll may still haunt the character, which this may lead to another sequel of the film. We decide to use omniscient narrative in the film, as it can be used to create anticipation within the audience, as the film may hint that something is going to happen to the characters by the sound effects being used or the setting. One way we did this is by using non-diegetic, sinister soundtrack in the library scene. This allowed to build tension in the audience, as they knew something was going to happen to Mike. This allows the film to get the audience's full attention, as they are more interested in the film, because they know that something is going to happen to Mike, as using soundtrack is a way of hinting at the audience. We decide to construct the film in chronological order, as it would be easier for the audience to follow the plot, because our target audience does not want a complex plot. They want to watch a film for the thrill and excitement, as most horror films follow the same structure, which there is a villain and a victim, and the victim is trying to overcome the villain. By keeping the film in chronological order, the audience is able to follow the storyline easier. The characters in Blue Ivy are typical of the horror genre, because in Blue Ivy there is a villain and a victim. This is typical of a film in the horror genre, as it enables to create an interesting plot, because usually in horror films the victim needs to overcome the villain. This is one of the main conventions of a horror film. One horror convention is the facial expressions. It's important in horror films as they show the feelings of characters. In Blue Ivy, Mike usually has a worried facial expression, as we wanted to portray him as a victim who is always haunted by a villain, as the audience can sympathize with him. One of the main horror conventions is the way the characters speak. It allows characters to express their feelings. We were able to do this in the cemetery scene in Blue Ivy.
Blue Ivy? I wonder what that means.
This created enigma, as this will keep the audience interested in the film, as they want to know who Blue Ivy is. When filming Blue Ivy, we decided to use various close-up shots. Close-up shots were used when filming the doll because it shows the significance of the doll to the plot. It's a way of the audience identify the doll as a villain. We use close-up shots of Mike to show his facial expressions to the audience as Mike is the victim and it's a way of the audience sympathizing with him. We were inspired by Annabelle when we were first introduced to the doll. Close-up shots are one of the main conventions of horror films because close-up shots portray the emotions of characters. The medium shots were used to show the body language of the characters. This is very important as each character's body language shows the audience the way they feel as it keeps the audience interested in the film. Because the way the characters portray the body language, it will make the scenes realistic and genuine. This is especially important in the library scene because Mike is afraid and he doesn't know what to do. This is similar in Annabelle as medium shots are used to show each character's body language as it's a way of communicating with the audience because it's a scary scene. Tracking shots is used in the beginning of the film when Mike and Colby were walking down an alleyway. This is used to build up tension and create mystery for the audience as that scene is slow paced and the tracking shot indicates that something terrible is going to happen to the characters. Tracking shots are regularly used in horror genres as it's mainly used for creating excitement within the audience. We decided to use the point of view shot when Mike was running to the cemetery to place the doll. Point of view shots are used to get the audience more involved and excited in the situation as it is a way of keeping the audience interested because the audience are able to see through the victim's eyes. Also, using POV shots shows the urgency of the character as the scene is fast paced. This is very typical of the horror genre as it's easier to create more hectic scenes. I got inspired by one of the scenes in Annabelle as something was creating strange noises to attract the victim. To make the film more interesting and scary, we used various soundtracks and sound effects to complement the scenes. We added an off-screen diegetic sinister whispering sound effect as it represented the doll haunting the victim. By doing this, it's a way of keeping the audience hooked to the film because it's a way of keeping them curious about the doll, but at the same time getting the audience scared as the haunted doll is creating mysterious sounds. This complemented the scene as we also used radio blur video effect which made the character look nauseous, which portrayed him getting haunted by the doll. This is something a lot of horror genres use as a simple but effective way of getting the audience scared. In the film we added various non-diegetic sinister soundtracks, which allows to build tension within the audience as the audience knows that usually means that something terrible is going to happen to the characters. This is typical ways of constructing meanings in horror films. This is one of the main horror genre conventions as a way of getting the audience scared and interested in the film. This is similar to Annabelle as they implemented non-diegetic soundtracks to create suspense and tension so that it is easier to get the audience terrified. The editing styles of films is very important as it allows to construct various meanings. In the beginning of Blue Ivy, the film was slow paced as this allows the audience to concentrate on what is going on in the film as it is slowly building tension within the audience as they are waiting for the scary scenes to happen. Then the film becomes faster paced. This is typical of horror genre as it is a way of getting the audience on the edge of their seats when watching the film. A lot of horror films use effects to make the film more appealing for the target audience. We did this by adding an effect called radio blur, which this allows the character to feel nauseous. This is important in the scenes as it emphasizes the doll whispering in the victim's head. It is a way of showing the victim's struggles when trying to overcome the villain. It is a way of getting the audience interested in the film as the effects are unique. The setting is important in horror films as it allows to create a sinister atmosphere. We did this by filming in the cemetery as it is an isolated setting which allows to build tension. This is something a lot of horror films do as it is one of the genre conventions.